She found out her husband had a second family, only to realize she wasn't the only one hiding something. Episode 1: Shattered Trust. To the outside world, Rachel Carter was the epitome of a woman who had it all, a woman who seemed to glide effortlessly through life, wrapped in an aura of grace and sophistication. Friends secretly admired her, strangers envied her, and thousands of followers online idolized her every post, longing for just a fragment of the perfection she appeared to possess. Rachel's life seemed like it had been painted by a masterful artist, every color vibrant, every detail flawless. Her meticulously curated Instagram feed was filled with radiant snapshots of her elegantly decorated home, each room bathed in soft sunlight, adorned with tasteful artwork, pristine white furniture, and lush bouquets of fresh flowers. Her children, always smiling brightly, impeccably dressed, seemed like angels brought to life, their laughter echoing warmly through perfectly edited videos. But above all, it was her relationship with Daniel Carter that drew the greatest admiration and envy. Rachel's followers watched with longing and awe whenever she shared intimate glimpses into their seemingly flawless marriage. Videos of romantic candlelit dinners at exclusive restaurants, photographs of Daniel gently kissing her forehead in airport terminals upon his return from another successful international trip. Each post carefully capturing the love everyone dreamt of finding but few ever truly experienced. Daniel himself was a portrait of charm and charisma. Tall, strikingly handsome, and impeccably dressed in custom-tailored suits, he was the kind of man who could effortlessly command any room he entered. His successful career as an international consultant only enhanced their glamorous image, whisking him frequently away to exotic destinations, Paris, Tokyo, Dubai. And every time he returned, Daniel would bring Rachel gifts wrapped beautifully in delicate silk ribbons, fine perfumes from France, intricate jewelry from Italy, vibrant dresses from Brazil. Each gift was another reminder to Rachel and everyone watching that she was cherished, adored, and uniquely special. Yet beneath every radiant smile, hidden behind every glamorous photograph, Rachel quietly carried the exhausting burden of maintaining this perfection. Her heart knew a different truth, a subtle but growing emptiness. Sometimes at night, as she sat alone staring at her glowing phone screen, reading hundreds of comments praising her perfect family and flawless marriage, a silent sadness whispered within her. Was this happiness truly hers? Or had she become trapped in an endless cycle of crafting and preserving illusions? And beneath Daniel's dazzling smiles and thoughtful gestures, Rachel sometimes sensed a quiet distance, a slight hesitancy in his touch, fleeting moments when his eyes seemed distant, his mind elsewhere. She quickly dismissed these unsettling feelings, convincing herself it was merely exhaustion from his demanding travels. But deep down, a fragile anxiety lingered, a faint shadow cast across her glittering life. Rachel had spent years carefully building the life everyone dreamed of. But little did she know, behind the glittering facade of her perfect marriage and picture-perfect home, a dark storm had quietly been brewing, one that would soon tear her world apart and reveal devastating truths she never imagined possible. On a quiet winter evening, swing the calm rhythm of Rachel's carefully curated life was abruptly shattered by a simple phone call, a call she had long stopped expecting. Rachel's hand froze mid-motion, coffee cup suspended halfway to her lips, as she recognized the familiar yet distant voice of her mother-in-law, Margaret Carter. Margaret had always been a mysterious figure, aloof, distant, rarely present. Throughout Rachel's marriage to Daniel, Margaret's presence had mostly been limited to occasional phone calls, polite birthday cards, and hollow excuses explaining why she couldn't visit. Rachel had long since accepted this distance, choosing never to pry, carefully tiptoeing around the silent, lingering tension between Daniel and his mother. But now, hearing Margaret's voice, older and softer yet no less imposing, Rachel felt a sudden rush of nervous energy, her pulse quickening as 1,000 unspoken worries filled her mind. Margaret's words were brief, yet clear and unsettling. "Rachel, dear, it's been far too long. I've decided it's finally time I visited and saw how my grandchildren are doing." The declaration caught Rachel off guard, carrying an edge of quiet authority. Margaret's sudden decision left no room for negotiation or delay, filling Rachel's heart with a strange mixture of hope, anxiety, and dread. When Margaret finally arrived a few days later, Rachel stood at the doorway, smiling graciously, despite the butterflies dancing nervously in her stomach. She wanted desperately to impress her mother-in-law, to prove that Daniel had chosen well, that their family was perfect, that she herself was worthy of Margaret's long-withheld approval. But the moment Margaret stepped into the immaculate home, Rachel immediately felt a subtle shift in the air, a sudden chill that seemed to creep into every corner of the room. Margaret's pale blue eyes scanned every detail of the house with a penetrating gaze, lingering strangely on framed family portraits that adorned the walls. Her expression was impossible to read, but Rachel felt silently judged, exposed, as if every carefully chosen piece of decor, every smiling photograph was being meticulously scrutinized. Margaret paused particularly long at pictures of Rachel's 2 children, her fingers brushing gently against the glass frames, as though reaching for memories just beyond her grasp. Over a meticulously prepared dinner, Rachel tried to ease the awkward tension. She spoke warmly, perhaps too eagerly, recounting her children's recent school awards, their music recitals, their innocent and amusing adventures. Margaret listened quietly, nodding politely but distantly, her mind clearly elsewhere. Then, in the midst of Rachel's animated storytelling, Margaret suddenly murmured something softly, something barely audible, yet startling enough to halt Rachel mid-sentence. "These grandchildren are lovely, Rachel," Margaret whispered thoughtfully, her gaze distant and contemplative. "But Daniel's other children, they're just as sweet." A tense silence fell over the table, the words hanging ominously between them. Rachel felt the room begin to spin slightly, a wave of cold confusion rushing over her. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, blood pounding in her ears. A nervous, forced laugh escaped Rachel's lips as she quickly tried to dismiss Margaret's words, believing, or desperately hoping, that her elderly mother-in-law was simply confused. Gently, with as much warmth and composure as she could manage, Rachel corrected her. "Oh, Margaret, these 2 are your only grandchildren." But Margaret's eyes flickered briefly with something like panic or regret. Her expression turned guarded, almost frightened. She hesitated, suddenly unsure, before quickly averting her eyes. "Of course, dear," she whispered faintly, nervously clutching her napkin. "Forgive me, I'm just tired from the journey." Rachel tried to smile reassuringly. But Margaret's words had already pierced deeply, planting a seed of doubt in her heart that would soon grow into something darker and far more troubling. As Rachel struggled to finish the meal, engaging in light conversation that felt forced and meaningless, an unsettling anxiety grew relentlessly within her. The small slip Margaret had made echoed quietly in the back of Rachel's mind, a whisper she couldn't silence, one that hinted at a hidden truth too terrifying to imagine. She desperately wanted to believe it was nothing more than confusion or a simple mistake. But deep down, Rachel knew Margaret's words had opened a door she might never be able to close again. A door leading toward a devastating truth waiting quietly in the shadows, ready to unravel the life she so meticulously crafted. A few restless days after Margaret's unsettling visit, Rachel found herself seeking comfort in the familiar embrace of friendship. She arranged a brunch with her closest friends, women she trusted implicitly, who had been there through all her triumphs and setbacks. Usually, these gatherings were filled with joyful laughter, carefree conversations about their busy lives, and gentle teasing about Rachel's seemingly perfect existence. But on this particular day, a shadow hung heavily over Rachel, something subtle yet undeniably present, unsettling her friends. As they sat at their usual corner table in their favorite cafe, the gentle hum of other patrons chatting happily around them, Rachel hesitated, struggling internally before finally deciding to reveal Margaret's strange, troubling comment. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying more of her underlying anxiety than she intended. When Rachel finished recounting Margaret's slip about Daniel having other grandchildren, a tense, uncertain silence settled over the table. Her friends exchanged brief, worried glances, each searching for the right words of reassurance. All except Sophie, whose eyes widened in sudden recognition, her face turning visibly pale. Rachel immediately noticed the strange reaction. "Sophie?" Rachel asked softly, leaning forward slightly, her heart starting to beat uncomfortably faster. "What's wrong?" Sophie hesitated, biting her lip nervously as if debating whether to speak at all. Rachel's stomach tightened painfully in anticipation, sensing intuitively that whatever Sophie was holding back could shatter something precious and fragile within her. Finally, Sophie drew a shaky breath and met Rachel's worried gaze with profound concern in her eyes. Her voice trembled gently as she spoke. "Rachel, there's something I've been holding back for months. I honestly didn't think it mattered. Or maybe I hoped it didn't. But hearing what Margaret said, now I'm not sure." Rachel swallowed hard, anxiety gripping her chest. "What is it, Sophie?" she whispered softly, afraid of the answer but desperately needing the truth. Sophie looked down at her coffee, tracing invisible circles nervously on the table before continuing. "It happened a few months ago. I was traveling to Chicago for a business conference. I was waiting in the airport lounge, and I saw Daniel. I was sure it was him. He was wearing that tailored suit you always joke about, Rachel, the dark gray one. I smiled, waved, even called his name." Rachel's throat tightened painfully. She knew exactly the suit Sophie was referring to. She had personally selected it for Daniel on their anniversary, lovingly joking that he looked far too handsome in it. "What happened next?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible now, her heart pounding heavily in her ears. Sophie's eyes filled with sorrowful compassion as she continued. "Rachel, he saw me. He turned his head directly toward me and recognized me. I'm absolutely certain of it. But then, instead of coming over or even waving back, he quickly turned away, almost panicking. He practically disappeared into the crowd, as if desperate to avoid me. It was so strange, so unlike Daniel, It's haunted me ever since." Rachel forced herself to laugh lightly, a brittle, hollow sound she barely recognized. "Oh, Sophie, you know Daniel. Always traveling, always rushing to meetings. Maybe he just didn't recognize you clearly or thought he saw someone else." But Sophie shook her head gently, her voice lowering to a whisper filled with quiet certainty. "No, Rachel. He saw me clearly, I promise. I saw his face. He looked shocked, terrified even. Something felt terribly wrong. I've struggled with it since that day, debating whether I should tell you, but after what Margaret said, you deserve to know." Rachel's forced smile slowly faded away, replaced by a deeply unsettling feeling of dread. Her heartbeat quickened, anxiety growing painfully inside her chest. She wanted to deny Sophie's words, to protect her heart from the implications. But deep inside, a small voice whispered relentlessly that something truly wasn't right. As her friends attempted to comfort her, offering gentle reassurances that perhaps there was an innocent explanation, Rachel stared silently at her trembling hands, her mind spinning desperately. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a dark, deep abyss, fearful of taking another step forward yet unable to retreat. And for the first time, Rachel began to genuinely question the man she loved, the man whose life was intricately woven into her own. Could it be possible Daniel had truly hidden something so enormous, so devastating for so long? Or was this simply the beginning of a nightmare that would soon unravel everything she held dear? She didn't have answers yet, but one thing was certain. The perfect life she had carefully built was beginning to fracture, revealing cracks she could no longer ignore. Late that night, long after everyone else had fallen asleep, Rachel sat alone in the oppressive silence of her immaculately decorated living room. The soft glow from her laptop cast an eerie light, illuminating the strained, worried expression on her face. The peaceful quiet of her home had always comforted her before, but tonight it felt suffocating, almost oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. Rachel's fingers trembled slightly as she navigated Daniel's social media profiles, her heart pounding with guilt and apprehension. This was something she had promised herself she would never do, something she believed firmly went against the very foundation of trust in their marriage. Yet the persistent whispers of doubt had grown too loud, impossible to ignore, forcing her to seek answers even at the risk of losing her peace of mind. Her eyes narrowed anxiously, scrolling slowly through Daniel's recent posts and tagged locations. Small, unsettling inconsistencies jumped out at her, each one fueling her anxiety further. Daniel had explicitly told her he'd spent 3 nights attending a critical business conference in Boston just last month. Yet Rachel's heart sank as she saw pictures clearly tagging him in Seattle. Images that showed him smiling casually in places he had never mentioned, among faces she didn't recognize. She swallowed hard, trying desperately to rationalize it. Perhaps Daniel had simply forgotten to mention a last-minute change in plans, or maybe someone mistakenly tagged him. She reassured herself weakly, trying to push aside the nagging sensation that twisted painfully in her stomach. Yet the growing shadow of doubt persisted relentlessly. Unable to resist the pull of her anxiety, Rachel opened their shared bank account, her breathing shallow and unsteady. She slowly scrolled through their recent statements, her pulse quickening with every new line that appeared on the screen. Tiny charges stood out starkly. A dinner at an upscale restaurant in Seattle, a purchase at a luxury clothing store Rachel had never heard of, and perhaps most painfully, receipts from a charming boutique specializing in baby clothing. Baby clothing. Those 2 words stabbed her heart deeply, awakening a rush of raw, fearful emotions. Daniel had never mentioned buying baby gifts, not for friends, colleagues, or relatives. Yet there, undeniably, was evidence that he had done exactly that. Rachel's heart raced, panic gripping her throat. Her perfect reality, the carefully constructed life she had proudly displayed to the world, suddenly felt unbearably fragile, as if one wrong breath might cause it to shatter entirely. Each discovery struck deeper into her confidence, her sense of safety and trust, leaving her emotionally wounded and dangerously vulnerable. She felt tears burning behind her eyes, a stinging mixture of fear, hurt, and frustration. Her hands shook visibly now as she struggled to maintain control, blinking rapidly to push back the emotions threatening to consume her. What else had Daniel hidden from her? Could she really believe that the man she loved so deeply, the father of her children, her partner, her best friend, was deliberately lying? Or was she simply spiraling into paranoia, letting her imagination destroy everything good she had built? But even as Rachel desperately attempted to convince herself otherwise, deep inside her heart, she knew with painful certainty that something was terribly wrong. A haunting realization began to settle heavily over her. The life she believed in, the perfect marriage she had cherished, might be nothing more than a beautifully constructed illusion, built upon lies that were beginning to surface, lies that threatened to tear everything apart. When Daniel finally returned from his latest business trip, the air between them was heavy with tension. Rachel had spent days carefully rehearsing what she would say, how gently she would approach him, striving to avoid conflict while desperately hoping for reassurance. Yet now, standing face to face with her husband, the man she once trusted more than anyone, her heart pounded with anxiety and dread, and the practiced words threatened to catch painfully in her throat. Daniel stood at the doorway, casually dropping his expensive briefcase beside the entrance. His handsome face was tired but charming as always, his dark eyes briefly meeting Rachel's with a distant warmth she once believed genuine. He approached her as if everything were perfectly normal, leaning in for a casual kiss on her cheek. But Rachel instinctively pulled away, an unspoken accusation already hanging heavily between them. A brief look of confusion crossed Daniel's face, quickly replaced by an edge of irritation. He stepped back, visibly annoyed. "What's wrong, Rachel?" he asked sharply, his voice edged with impatience. Rachel took a shaky breath, forcing herself to sound calm despite the emotions churning violently within her. "Nothing's wrong," she lied softly, attempting a casual tone. "I was just wondering how your trip went. You've been traveling so much lately. Sometimes it feels hard to keep track." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, suspicion flaring instantly behind his carefully maintained composure. "You seem very interested in my schedule lately, Rachel," he snapped irritably, his voice now colder, harsher, each word piercing deeply into Rachel's fragile confidence. "You've never worried about my trips before. Why the sudden fascination?" Rachel's voice trembled noticeably as she hesitated, her stomach twisting painfully with apprehension. Summoning all her courage, she quietly pressed on, cautiously mentioning Sophie's strange encounter at the airport in Chicago, her voice growing increasingly uncertain with each word. "Sophie saw you in Chicago, Daniel. She says you recognized her and deliberately avoided her. She seemed concerned." Daniel abruptly interrupted with a sharp, mocking laugh, a cold sound Rachel had rarely heard before. The warmth had drained completely from his eyes, replaced by contemptuous disbelief. "Sophie?" Daniel scoffed cruelly, a disdainful smirk twisting his mouth. "You're listening to Sophie now? Really, Rachel? She's always loved drama, thrives on it. Do you honestly believe her over me?" Rachel recoiled, stunned and deeply hurt by Daniel's unexpectedly harsh reaction. Tears welled behind her eyes, the sting of humiliation and betrayal nearly overwhelming her. She tried desperately to respond, to reason with him, but words failed her, caught painfully in the lump forming in her throat. Daniel glared at her bitterly, his voice cold and accusing. "I travel constantly to provide for this family, for you, for the children, for the perfect little world you adore showing off to everyone else. And this is how you repay me? Accusations based on gossip from your ridiculous friends?" His voice rose sharply, his face darkening with anger. "I expected better from you, Rachel." Without waiting for her response, Daniel turned sharply, grabbing his keys from the table and storming out the door, slamming it harshly behind him. The echo reverberated painfully through their beautiful home, shattering the fragile sense of safety Rachel had always cherished. Rachel stood frozen in place, her breathing ragged and uneven. Daniel's cruel words lingered painfully in the sudden, heavy silence, echoing in her ears. She felt numb, confused, and unbearably alone. Her worst fears seemed more painfully real than ever before, as Daniel's defensiveness had confirmed her darkest suspicions. Collapsing weakly onto the nearby sofa, Rachel buried her face in her trembling hands, tears spilling uncontrollably down her cheeks. The perfect life she had desperately tried to protect had now become a prison of doubts and lies. Daniel's coldness had exposed a fracture so deep, Rachel feared it might never heal again. As she sat alone in the quiet darkness, she realized with painful clarity that nothing would ever be the same again. And the worst was yet to come. In the days following their painful confrontation, Rachel's life felt suspended in an unbearable state of uncertainty. Each passing moment deepened the aching dread that had quietly taken root in her heart, spreading like poison, infecting every thought and action. She struggled desperately to maintain the facade of normalcy, smiling brightly for her children, posting carefully staged pictures to maintain her online persona. But privately, Rachel was unraveling. Every unanswered question, every suspicious memory gnawed relentlessly at the edges of her sanity. Then, on a deceptively bright afternoon, the fragile veil she had desperately maintained was torn away forever. The sun streamed cheerfully through the windows of their picture-perfect home, mocking Rachel's inner turmoil. She was mechanically going about her usual tasks, arranging fresh flowers, tidying cushions, attempting in vain to distract herself from the growing anxiety. When the doorbell rang, she opened the door to find a courier holding a small, neatly wrapped package. Rachel took the package without much thought, closing the door softly behind her. But as she looked down at the box, her heart stilled. Clearly written on the label was Daniel's name, yet the address was unfamiliar, an address that made no sense to her, belonging somewhere Daniel had never mentioned. A cold sense of curiosity gripped her. For a moment she hesitated, a faint voice within warning her to leave it unopened. But the suspicion, now impossible to suppress, overwhelmed her caution. Trembling fingers carefully tore open the packaging, revealing a beautifully wrapped box inside, tied neatly with a soft silk ribbon. Rachel's breath quickened, an unsettling sense of dread twisting tightly within her chest. Slowly, she lifted the delicate lid, her breath catching sharply as the contents became visible. Nestled carefully in delicate layers of fine tissue paper lay tiny, exquisitely embroidered baby clothes. Each stitch perfect, lovingly crafted, heartbreakingly innocent. Her fingers brushed against the soft fabric, tears immediately stinging her eyes as her heart plummeted painfully. And there, lying gently atop the tiny garments, was a small note written unmistakably in Daniel's familiar handwriting, a handwriting she had loved and recognized immediately for years. Her hands shook violently as she picked up the small card, her eyes scanning the words she would never forget. "I can't wait to meet you, my little angel. Love, Daddy." Rachel's knees buckled beneath her, and she sank to the floor, clutching the tiny clothing to her chest. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps, tears spilling uncontrollably down her cheeks as the harsh reality of Daniel's betrayal crashed over her like a devastating wave. The room spun around her, blurring with tears as her carefully constructed life shattered irreparably into countless pieces. In that terrible moment, Rachel finally understood the full extent of Daniel's deception. He had another life, another family, a child she knew nothing about. Each passing year, every intimate moment they had shared, every whispered promise, every carefully staged photograph had been a cruel illusion. Her marriage, her love, her sense of security, all suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. Pain quickly gave way to an overwhelming fury that burned fiercely through her veins, igniting within her heart a strength she had never felt before. Rage surged through her body, replacing sorrow with determination. She refused to become a victim trapped by lies and betrayal. She would no longer remain in darkness, bound by secrets and uncertainty. Through the blinding haze of her heartbreak, Rachel rose shakily to her feet, still gripping the delicate baby clothes tightly. In that darkest moment, something powerful awakened within her, a fierce resolve that would not be extinguished until every hidden truth was laid bare. Daniel Carter would no longer control her reality through lies and deception. She would fight for clarity, for truth, for herself and for her children. Even if it meant destroying the carefully constructed image she had once cherished, Rachel would expose every secret hidden beneath Daniel's web of lies. The truth was painful, devastating, but it was finally within her grasp, and nothing would stop her from uncovering it completely. In the devastating aftermath of discovering Daniel's betrayal, Rachel felt her entire world shift violently beneath her feet. What had once been solid and reassuring now felt terrifyingly unstable, each step forward plunging her deeper into a darkness filled with hidden truths and heart-wrenching uncertainties. As Rachel sat alone, clutching the small, innocent baby clothes, symbols of Daniel's unforgivable deception, a haunting realization crept slowly into her consciousness, sending icy chills down her spine. Daniel was cunning, remarkably intelligent, and incredibly manipulative. His lies had not been casual or impulsive. They were meticulously crafted, carefully maintained over years. If Daniel had succeeded in hiding one entire family from her, Rachel's blood ran cold at the thought that there might be others, other secrets, other lies, other lives she knew absolutely nothing about. Suddenly, Rachel felt as if she had loved and shared her life with a complete stranger. How could she have been so blind, so trusting, so unaware of who Daniel truly was beneath his charming facade? Every intimate conversation they had ever shared now seemed tainted. Every whispered, "I love you." Every passionate embrace felt like cruel manipulations. Rachel's heart ached fiercely at the sheer magnitude of betrayal she was now forced to confront. Yet, as she vowed fiercely to herself that she would uncover every truth Daniel had hidden, another, more terrifying thought slowly emerged. A truth Rachel had buried deeply within herself, carefully hidden beneath layers of denial and shame. A secret she had spent years painstakingly concealing, believing it could never resurface, never hurt her again. But now, beneath the heavy shadow of Daniel's betrayal, Rachel's own buried truth clawed its way toward the surface, desperate to break free. Her secret was one she had forced herself to forget, a choice made long ago in a moment of desperation and weakness, something that threatened to unravel every thread of her carefully reconstructed life. The perfect image she had painstakingly built, piece by delicate piece, now stood fragile and vulnerable, trembling on the brink of collapse. Rachel's pulse raced uncontrollably as memories long suppressed began flooding back, vivid and painful, refusing to remain hidden. Panic surged through her, tightening painfully in her chest as she realized with horrifying clarity that Daniel was not the only one hiding something devastating. The truth she had hidden within herself carried the potential to destroy everything that remained standing. Rachel Carter's meticulously perfected life, once a beautiful facade envied by all, had shattered completely, revealing a twisted landscape of betrayal, deception, and dark, buried secrets. She knew with dreadful certainty that the truths yet to be discovered would be far worse, far more painful than anything she had faced already. In the quiet devastation of her unraveling life, Rachel understood that nothing could ever prepare her for what would come next. She had entered a labyrinth of lies, both Daniel's and her own, and escaping it would come at a terrible cost. That's the end of episode 1, but the real twists are yet to come. Don't miss episode 2.